Good evening. The makers of this podcast feel it would be a little bit unkind to present the following without just a word of friendly warning. We are about to unfold the story of Baron Frankenstein, a man of high birth and also a man of science, a man possessed of a remarkable intellect who sought to create a man from nothing and imbue that man with life without first reckoning upon the wrath of the Almighty. Originating in the imagination and nightmares of 18-year-old Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, this classic tale of the Mad Doctor and his pitiable creation has, in the subsequent 2 centuries, managed to permeate almost every facet of popular culture. Since its initial publication in 1818, the story has been adapted for the stage, the radio, the television, and of course, for the silver screen, of which the number that have been created are too numerous to count. Over the next few weeks, we will be looking into the efforts of a small, unknown British studio named Hammer, as they attempt to take this oft-told tale and create it once more for the cinema. And in doing so, not only revolutionize the genre, but create a franchise that will go down in cinematic history. It is a tale that I think will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. Today, we will begin with the inception of this franchise. Created in 1957, we will find out how Frankenstein's curse and subsequent revenge will spell both success and legacy for the House of Hammer.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was good. That was really good.
I totally thought you were going to hit stop there and then we would start up, but okay, I guess we're just going right into it. We're back. It's been a hot minute. Again.
What?
It's been a while. But yes, so the impending Halloween season is soon to be upon us. Actually, really soon. As of this recording, today is the 25th of September. Wow, did that go by fast.
Yes.
So we are hot on the heels of the upcoming Halloween season. And those of you who know me know that Halloween is probably my favorite holiday because it gives me an excuse to watch all this shit. When if I watch it at any other time, people will be like, "You're weird." Then all of a sudden, it's Halloween. And it's like, oh, yeah, I'm in the mood for that.
It's okay now.
It's okay now. We are actually kind of doing a switch up for What Do You Mean You Haven't Seen? Because in this particular case, you have seen these.
Yes. I sure did.
A man of few words. I actually, well, in a way, we would almost consider these to be the impetus of this podcast because other than introducing you to stuff that you damn well should have seen years ago, Indiana Jones, Back to the Future, I randomly showed you Frankenstein Created Woman probably a good 2 years ago now, maybe more.
Mm-hmm.
And you were kind of like, nah, Frankenstein is bullshit, I don't care.
I want to see Frankenstein. What?
But then...
Yes, after you berated me and harassed me.
Again.
You wouldn't stop talking about Frankenstein.
Again.
I said, yeah. I said, okay. You know.
I said, it's short. It'll be fine.
I gave in.
As you usually do. So, subsequently, based on your enjoyment of Frankenstein Created Woman, we went forward and watched the next 2 movies in the series and then started all the way back at the beginning and watched the first 3. So, we went a bit out of order. So, in the spirit of the Halloween season, you felt it might be a good time to revisit these and in the proper order. So, as stated in the little introduction, we are going to, over the next 3 episodes, go through the original 6 Peter Cushing-led Hammer Frankenstein movies, 2 per episode. So today's episode will focus on the initial 2, Curse of Frankenstein from 1957 and 1958's follow-up, The Revenge of Frankenstein. And then, assuming all things go well, next episode we will delve into The Evil of Frankenstein and Frankenstein Created Woman.
In 5 months we will
in
have
5
the
months.
second episode.
And then about a year and a half from now we will We'll wrap up the Peter Cushing series with Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed and Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. And then, just to keep the theme of the podcast somewhat true, we will end it all with your first viewing of the 1970 horror of Frankenstein, which is an offshoot of the series because it does not star Peter Cushing, and in fact is more of a slightly black comedy-ish remake of The Curse of Frankenstein. But you have not seen that one yet, so...
No. And this fits with the theme of the podcast.
Yes.
Even though we watched it twice. You showed me this movie about the same time last year.
Was it only last year?
Yeah. It's been a whole year. I mean, when did because it came out on Blu-ray.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? No. Last year was when we watched Curse of Frank. Oh, yeah, this one specifically.
This one
you're
specifically.
right. I'm thinking like when I showed you Creative Woman. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it came out last December on Blu-ray, which is like
around there.
Way to go, Warner Brothers. You really know how to time these things because nobody except for me would be like thoroughly enjoying like it's holiday season. No, it's Santa Claus, Christmas, birth of Jesus. Let's watch Curse of Frankenstein.
Well, but the point of the podcast is you show me these movies that I otherwise would never watch.
This is fair.
But they're fantastic movies.
Yes. I will go on record now as saying that, I mean, I may be not thinking of something, but if I were to think of not necessarily a horror franchise, but like a horror sci-fi franchise, this one is probably my favorite, just because I honestly think it is the most unique and interesting franchise that to come out of like the horror sci-fi genre. Because each movie has its merits. Some are better than others. Some are kind of but they all have something interesting in it. Yeah. And the one consistent thing through these 6 is Peter Cushing, who is badass.
The best.
All right, so let's do a little bit of history leading up to where we're at with these 2 films in particular. So, and I'm kind of going off the top of my head here. I don't have too many notes or anything, but so kind of what was said in the introduction. So, Frankenstein as a story is written by Mary Shelley at the age of 18 in 1816, which is probably where I got her age mixed up when we talked about it before. She was married at the time to Percy Shelley, famous poet. And
Percy Jackson.
Yes, and the Sea Monsters. There was a lot of rain involved, though, so there is that. Close enough. I don't know how much of this is specifically true, how much of it is just legend, but the legend goes that there was like this one particular, the summer of 1816, which I guess I heard somebody refer to as like, the summer where there was no summer, because it was just constant rain and storms and terrible weather and people being shut up inside and not able to go out and do anything. It was the pandemic of its day.
Damn.
And I guess Percy Shelley and his relatively new bride Mary, who he married when she was 16, because that's what they did back then. They were staying at the same villa, cottage, whatever, of Lord Byron, who was also a writer, and I believe Byron's doctor, Dr. John Polidori. And again, weather-wise, they couldn't get out, they couldn't do anything. So as you did back then, when you had no TV, no internet, no anything, they're like, I'm bored. Let's have a horror writing contest. Not sitting around the fire and telling a tale off the top of their heads. No, let's all go off and write a ghost story. And they did. That apparently took a weekend, and I think, if memory serves me correctly, Mary was the one that was having trouble coming up with an idea. Everybody else kind of comes up with their own stuff. And then she ends up one night over the weekend having a nightmare. The nightmare was essentially the birth of the creature. And she has this nightmare about this young, scientist, this young man in an attic space somewhere with this body that's very obviously been like stitched together from parts of others, and then the body starting to like come to life and the eyes flickering open and whatever. It terrified her. She had a nightmare. She woke up, and she came up with the concept from there. So it's actually kind of weird. The same story writing contest that gives birth to Frankenstein also technically gives birth to the modern vampire story. because John Polidori ends up coming up with a story that he ends up publishing called The Vampire, about a character named, I believe, Lord Ruthven. And that story, even though it's not quite the same as what we usually figure as far as a vampire story, that actually predates Bram Stoker's Dracula by almost a century. Figure this is 1816. I think Dracula was published in 1897, if I'm not mistaken. So quite a few years beforehand. But anyway, so Mary eventually, when she tells her story, is encouraged to write it down. She publishes it first as a novel in 1818. Has to go through numerous publishers just to get it published, because most of them are like, nope, we don't want to do that. Nope, we don't want to do that. Nope, we have no interest. I think eventually it gets published through like one of the more low rent publishers at the time, and it's just like, whatever, we'll put it out. It was published anonymously. Some people, theorized for a while when they started to hear that it was from her that it wasn't really her story, but it was actually her husband Percy that wrote it. All this other shit. She eventually goes back some like 12 to 15 years later and then revises it and republishes it in 1831, and that's the kind of more commonly available version that's out there. Not a lot of drastic changes from what I know, but she polished it a little bit. I mean, obviously, I'm sure her skills have probably increased since she was 18. So then it kind of goes on. It becomes its own thing. It's not a massive hit as a book at the time. Kind of like with a lot of things, the book doesn't really become the hit. It's more of the adaptations that become the hit. Like Godfather, Jaws, things of that, where it's like, oh yeah, they're books. But nobody ever really talks about the book. They always talk about the movie.
Godfather was a book?
Exactly. There you go.
Oh, okay.
So it doesn't really become like a major hit until it starts getting adapted for the stage. The most major first stage production, I think, is called, because they have cheesy titles back then, they called it Presumption, or The Fate of Frankenstein. And yeah, I know. And then a lot of the elements that would end up making its way into the later movies, like the hunchbacked assistant character Fritz gets introduced in that play. Fritz, who then kind of morphs later on into like the standard idea of like Igor, which we'll talk about that when we talk about the Universal ones at some point, because that's very confusing. But yeah, a lot of the elements that would be utilized in the movies come from the plays. A lot of like the action set pieces, the big massive creation sequence originates on stage, which makes sense because in the book I believe she just injects him, or she has Frankenstein inject the monster with just like this liquid or some. It's very vague how it's described in the book, and then it just sort of comes to life. I remember hearing about that. Yeah, and then it's like, well, for the stage, for the theatricality of people sitting on stage wanting to see this thing come to life, you don't want to just come over and be like, and then it goes, no, they want some big crowd-pleasing, apparatus and whatever else, and that's where that kind of originates from. The first film version comes out in 1910 from Thomas Edison Studios. So the man who invented the light bulb and also invented the film camera, his studios are the first ones to produce a Frankenstein feature, which is 12 minutes long.
He's the man.
He's a famous inventor. Swear to God, if you don't know who Edison is, then...
Of course I know Edison. All right. Jesus.
All right. Okay. No, he's not Jesus. He's Edison. Get it right. So that comes out in 1910. I think there might have been a couple other now lost silent versions in between. The next major production is released by Universal Studios in 1931, directed by James Whale, and that is like the famous Frankenstein, starring Boris Karloff as the monster. And that is the one that is pretty much like the one that is in everyone's minds when they think of the Frankenstein monster. That makeup, that, square head, the bolts coming out of the neck, the scar on the head, and, the black outfit and the big thick boots and everything. Every character that if you ask a kid, like, what's the Frankenstein monster look like? And they draw you some crude drawing of the Frankenstein monster, it's going to look like that. That's how iconic that image and that makeup is. So that series begins with Frankenstein in 1931. They then make a direct sequel in 1935, The Bride of Frankenstein, also with Karloff. They take a couple-year break, and then they come back and do Son of Frankenstein in 1939, also with Karloff. the big difference, well, not the difference, we haven't discussed this yet, but the main drive here is that for the most part, the Universal series would follow the monster. The monster would be the same in every movie and eventually played by different actors, but it's still the same creation. And as the series progressed, it became less and less about Frankenstein as like character or story. The monster becomes less and less a part of the overall story. Eventually they start doing the matchups like Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, House of Dracula, where there's, you know, the monster, Dracula, and everybody else. By that point, like, the monster barely gets off the operating table. And of course it finally culminates in 1948's Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which is just a setup of the entire genre. That's in 1948. Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein is pretty much, even though it's a classic and I love it, it is the movie that basically said, okay, we're done with Gothic horror. The whole idea of like the creepy castles and the, you know, the Victorian settings and, you know, that kind of horror movie is kind of over at that point. You're then getting into the 1950s, and the 1950s ended up being much more sci-fi based. There's a lot of you know, the apprehension about the, you know, science gone wrong and the nuclear age and things like that. All of a sudden you get movies in the 1950s that are all about, you know, giant irradiated ants, giant tarantulas, giant, you know, monsters coming up from the depths of the sea. You get the original Godzilla in 1954 that's awoken by the atom bomb and
Jeez.
all that kind of shit. And even the horror stuff that was coming out at the time, for the most part, would be sci-fi based. So even like late Universal horror, like Creature from the Black Lagoon, yes, it's a monster, but it's still like more of a science fiction monster. It's some like throwback Gillman, whatever. The Gothic horror is kind of taking a back seat, and no one's really doing that anymore. The closest you would get to something like that I can think of at the time, at least in the States, is, and I want to say it's 1954 or 55, somewhere around there, Warner Brothers releases House of Wax with Vincent Price, which has at least like a Victorian setting. It's not really like a Gothic horror movie like Dracula, Frankenstein, and all that, but it's got those like tropes to it. So, and that becomes a big hit. That's also one of the first 3D features, which probably helped, but that becomes a big hit. Around this time, overseas in England, you have this very small British studio called Hammer that for the most part had been doing a bunch of like crime movies, film noir, black and white, pretty all black and white, nothing color for them at the time. Very low budget, and they've been around for years. They've been around, I think since like the 30s, and they were relatively successful, but nothing that really like made a big splash anywhere. And then 1955, I believe, they end up obtaining the rights to a BBC television serial called The Quatermass Experiment, which, again, a science fiction story written by Nigel Neal, and it was, again, written as an episodic BBC serial. It's, you know, however many half-hour episodes that appeared on TV, and it was very popular, huge hit, whatever else. So Hammer's like, hey, let's strike while the iron's hot. Let's take this, you know, long-form series and adapt it as an hour-and-a-half feature film. We'll play off the name recognition. We'll cast a well-established but, you know, kind of washed-up American actor as the lead, you know, Professor Quatermass, whatever. That becomes a huge hit for them. But the main thing is that they found that people were really responding to the horror elements of it, because even though it's science fiction, Quatermass Experiment is essentially about an astronaut who went on an experimental, you know, rocket into space. Everyone else in his crew is killed. He comes back supposedly fine, but he's been infected by some kind of like alien entity, something or other, and he starts to gradually morph into a creature, like an alien creature, and that's what scared the shit out of people. So all of a sudden, Hammer's like, oh, horror might be worthwhile. And then they start thinking, well, what can we do? And I think around that time, they were actually approached by a couple other producers with a script for a Frankenstein film, which they showed interest in, And then I don't remember the complete details, but essentially they took the idea, didn't like the script, decided to make their Frankenstein movie anyway, but without those people. And then, went on to success, and those guys were like, well, fuck you, we brought you the idea. I believe it was Milton Subotsky and a couple other guys that were involved. They would eventually go on to form Amicus Pictures, which ended up being the number one rival to Hammer during that time, and they would utilize Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, a lot of the same people, and make other types of movies, horror movies, but different types. So essentially Hammer's like, okay, based on the success of Quatermass Experiment, let's go all out this time. Let's give it a shot. We're going to do an adaptation of Frankenstein. We're going to shoot it in color, which this actually marks. It's not the first horror movie in color, because I think that would actually be House of Wax, but it is the first British color horror film. It's definitely the first color Frankenstein film. And, obviously they're putting more money into it. At the time, they get a substantial TV star, Peter Cushing, who had been in their BBC version of 1984, George Orwell's 1984. He's a huge TV star at this point, and they managed to nab him to play Victor Frankenstein in the series. What was I going to say? I'm getting there. My train of thoughts. Yes, anyway. So, yeah, I think the whole point was that it was supposed to be like a one-and-done type thing, which we'll discuss, after we saw the movie. He's like, oh, yeah, this is not intending to be the beginning of a franchise. It's just like, hey, let's give it a shot. But it ultimately ends up becoming a massive hit, both here and, more importantly, in the States. So now Hammer's not only a success within their own home country, but they're also making waves overseas and getting overseas distribution, which they hadn't before. So it ends up becoming like a massive hit, and then that leads obviously to, let's replicate the formula. Well, Frankenstein's the main one. What's the other main one? Well, let's do Dracula. And then let's see if we can get other ones. So they start making their mummy movie, their werewolf movie, their Sherlock Holmes movie, and then they sequelize a bunch of stuff, and then it's all history from there. But it all originates in this one-off Frankenstein film, which is intended to just be yet another tale of that book, and then it morphs into something else completely, which is the first one that we watched.
The Curse of Frankenstein?
The Curse of Frankenstein.
Oh my god! Finally.
You were just waiting for me to say the name?
A half hour later, we're finally talking about
the movie we came to talk about. So what'd you think?
About the
Curse of Frankenstein.
Little adventure that you just went on?
Shut the fuck up. What did you think about the Curse of Frankenstein?
It's great. I think it's great. The second time around watching it, I liked it a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good one-off movie, but then we're going to talk about Revenge too.
Yeah, we'll talk about Revenge
because we watched them back to back.
Yeah, we watched them back to back.
And those two, if you watch Curse and then you watch Revenge, perfect.
Dovetail nicely one into the other.
Oh, it's so good. I appreciate the movie more seeing it the second time, because the first time I think that's.
Well, you liked it the first time, from what I remember.
I liked it the first time, but I don't know. I picked up more the second time watching.
Yeah, I mean especially for me now at my age, that seems to be my thing, is that I have to see something at least twice to really let it sink in. It's always that, like, I never trust an initial reaction unless I absolutely love it the first time, where there's like no doubt in my mind. If I'm like on the ropes, I have to at least see it twice to let it all sink in. But
yeah, because a lot of stuff I missed the first time. Because with these Hammer movies, you really got to pay attention to the dialogue.
Yeah, they don't waste time.
No, they don't. There's no filler scenes.
Yes, no, because most of these movies are like relatively. I want to say Curse of Frankenstein was like hour and 20 minutes.
Not very long,
maybe.
Yeah,
and it's like, oh well, yeah, let's go. Let's
like movies now. You know when the boring scenes are, where there's not a lot going on. You don't really care. It does nothing for the plot. You're just like, okay, well, I'm gonna scroll on my phone for a minute because this is.
I would say that there's another good way to judge them is like at what point in the Curse of Frankenstein would have been a good point for you to get up and go to the bathroom?
You'd have to pause it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like if you were in a theater, it's like, oh, there's not very many good spots to get up and go pee.
Yeah, but if you're watching like a new movie now, you're like, okay, not much is going on. You know nothing's going on.
Yeah.
It's a dumb scene.
Yeah.
I'll be right back. Don't bother pausing it.
Yeah.
But with this, if you try to do that and you come back, you're like, well, what the hell's going on?
Well, even this time around, because, I've seen it dozens of times. You'd already seen it once, so we weren't so inclined to pay attention to it as deeply as we did the first time.
Yeah.
But like even there were a couple times that we're talking about something and you're like, wait, what the hell just happened? I'm like,
Exactly.
oh, this happened because I know. And you're like, well, when did that happen? I'm like, he just said it 2 seconds ago.
He just said it, and then I'm like, oh shit, I gotta. Which is really sad.
Nah, but I mean, like that's the point though. There's not wasted subplots or dialogue. I mean, there's like little moments that are thrown in that are kind of throwaway, like jumping to towards the end, but like when they have the night before the wedding sequence when all the village is there, and you have that one guy who's doing his practicing his toast by drinking all the punches to the bride and groom, to the happy couple.
That's a great scene.
But that's
a great
that's good.
Scene.
That's like nice little after all the crazy shit. It's like we'll throw in a little comedic bit here. That's fine.
No, that's fine. No, it's sad that's like kind of like the state of kind of movies today.
Yeah, where
you know when you can like zone out.
Well, we've talked about it before, where we
this.
think that the length of movies now, it's almost like length to the studios equals quality. Like the longer your movie is, the more like substantial as a movie it is. Like, hey, our movie's 2.5 hours long. It's no, throwaway piece of shit. It's quality.
Right.
Be like, no, because you could have cut out 20 minutes of that and it would have been perfectly fine. But no, we really got. And it's not like they're using the time to their advantage to like let it breathe. Like a good example I would think is, some people would say like Blade Runner 2049. Some people would say that's too long because it's like 2 hours 45 minutes.
I got a Blade Runner meme to show you.
Oh, good.
I saved it to my phone just for you.
Okay, thank you.
I saw it and I was like, I gotta send this to Bob.
Okay, well that's going to be after this. But I mean that's like 2 hours and 45 minutes, and I can understand some people will be like, it's too. But when I watch that movie, it's like, oh no, you're taking your time. And you're not throwing in a bunch of crap for no reason. You're taking your time to like develop the characters and to develop the story naturally. I don't mind that. If you take that extra time and you know how to pace it so it's actually interesting and it's not boring, that's fine. Another good example, we're off the beaten path here, but like when I compared going to a theater to see Lawrence of Arabia, that was, no, you know what? I'm not even going to use that one. I'm going to use Ben-Hur. When I went to a theater and saw Ben-Hur, which I had seen many, many times, and that movie's just under 3 hours, I think.
Yeah.
Or maybe just a little more than 3 hours. And I was fascinated watching it again, keeping in mind that like I've seen it before. I know exactly what's going to happen and when. And yet, sitting in a theater for 3 hours watching it, I was not bored. I was not like jittery. I wasn't like shifting in my seat or anything.
Yeah.
And I realized as I'm watching it, I'm like, damn, we're already this far. I'm like, it's 3 hours, but they know how to pace a movie back then. Like, there's no waste, there's no fat on that movie. It's 3 hours, but it needs the 3 hours.
Yeah.
Compared to, shortly after that, I went and saw It Chapter 2.
Oof.
And that's just under 3 hours as well. It's like 2 hours, 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And there is like a dip in the middle where you're like, come on, let's go. Where it's just like, you don't need this. This is repetitive. This is getting boring. And it's like, you're inflating it for no reason. It's like night and day.
Yeah.
And again, movies like these, you don't need your movie to be longer than it needs to be. Just tell the damn story.
Yeah. And they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. They waste no time.
Yeah. Well, we even talked about it when we were watching it again when, because at first your opinion the first time around of I was a teenage Frankenstein, at first you're like, who the fuck is this
For
kid?
a moment.
For a moment.
When they introduce him, like, oh, they're doing a flashback? Okay.
But then he's awesome.
But he's so good.
And, again, just comparing, like, that kid to Peter Cushing, I don't know if they compared notes or if he watched Peter Cushing shooting stuff beforehand and based his performance on that, but, like, I believe that that's Peter Cushing as a teenager.
Yeah.
Be like, oh, she'll make someone a fine wife. Yes, I'm sure she will. just very curt and like to the point, just like, yeah, goodbye.
Yeah, the woman's like, oh,
Yes, I understand. I shall do the same. And it's like, what a dick.
He just wants him to get the hell out of there.
But we even talked about it this time. Like, when that sequence is over, I'm like, dude, that part's already done. And it's like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But you remember that part in that performance.
Yeah.
Somehow it seems like it's longer, but it's not. It's 5 minutes of the movie, and then it's done. And then we're into Peter Cushing. And,
it's memorable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's the other thing that I like, is I like the idea of, especially for movies at that time, like mid to late 1950s, where if you see like a Victorian era Technicolor British film with the people in their prim and proper clothing and their corsets and their big poofy dresses and the guys in their top hats and their tails and their everything else.
Yeah.
It's always like some, stuffy, it's a Jane Austen novel, or it's a Charles Dickens Great Expectations, Oliver Twist kind of thing. And there's the nice tranquil music, and there's something about seeing, especially at the beginning of this one, when they have the very pleasant music playing. When you have even though it's at like a funeral, like they just got done having the funeral for Frankenstein's mother,
right?
And he's like dismissing all the relatives, and then like good old Paul, comes in to be the tutor, and they have like this very nice tranquil music, and it's like, there's gonna be some fucked up shit that happens here soon. And I like that idea of taking like what everyone sees as like the very prim and proper British society, and just like all the seedy shit that could be going on behind closed doors that you don't talk about.
Yeah.
Like, oh, what a wonderful, amazing looking house. What a wonderful manor. Yeah, but guess what's going on in the fucking attic that you can't see up those stairs? That kind of thing. So I like that. It's very claustrophobic, too. Because, I mean, again, that's probably like a budgetary thing.
Yeah.
There's very little outside the castle, the manor, whatever the hell it is that they're living in. Like literally there's the point when the monster gets out later on when they have to go into the woods. That's outside.
Yeah.
There's, burying Dr. Bernstein in the Frankenstein crypt.
Yeah.
And then him going and getting the brain. That's obviously outside. But I think aside from that and a couple shots, like literally standing outside the castle, they don't leave. It's all just like in there, and it's very unsettling to me how like which again, budgetary purposes,
right.
Hey, like we're gonna have basically one set. We're gonna have like which again, the magic of movies from what I heard and read about is that like the set for the laboratory where the monster's being created that's supposed to be in the attic is literally next to the set for the drawing room. So like if you were on set, you would walk from the drawing room and you would literally walk to the left and like, oh, there's the monster laying on the slab. Magic of movies. But just like, that very, very claustrophobic, hey, we're all just stuck in this house kind of thing with these very few characters.
They never leave the mansion except for the one outside. Who also...
and then when they go to get the body that's hanging from the gibbet.
True.
They do that. But
just
for the most part, it's just in there, and it's very, very...
Yeah. You never leave.
It's unsettling.
Just like Paul.
Good old Paul Kremper, who... Victor, you are doing horrible things. Well, why don't you leave, Paul? Well, I intend to. In about 6 weeks. I'd still have yet to pack.
After everything, I'm disgusted. And he's wearing his nice robe.
Which is probably Victor's robe.
Yeah,
I doubt that he could afford that on like the... It's not like he's rich.
No.
He's literally like taking a job as a fucking tutor. So I'm sure most of what he probably owns in that house is, if it wasn't paid for by him, it's probably like Victor's hand-me-downs or like stuff that Victor's father owned. And it's like, well, I'm going to leave and I'm taking this red smoking jacket with me, Victor. I'm delighted. That's the hidden meaning. The movie is not about Victor Frankenstein or his creation. It's an allegory for that type of house guest who never leaves. And you're always too polite to say anything about it. It's like, oh yes, you're going to stay another day, are you? Charming. Yes, yes. Go on, Paul. Make yourself at home. Yes, that's mine. But no, you can wear it. That. Well, no, that's. I was saving that for a rainy day. But that's fine. Go ahead. Okay, fine.
Yeah. Does Victor ever tell him to leave outright?
He doesn't tell him to leave outright. There's that one part where he's like lecturing Victor on stuff, and he's like, "Well, why don't you leave, Paul?"
Yes, he does say, yeah.
And instead of saying like something sarcastic, he's like, "Oh, but maybe it's because of Elizabeth that makes you stay," which it totally is, because he totally wants to nail Elizabeth, but that's neither here nor there. Which again, creepy. Because Paul looks not much older in these sequences than he did in the original sequence with the teenage Frankenstein.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah,
until Paul, I pointed. Yeah, and then teenage Frankenstein is already like at least probably a good 5 or 6 years older than Elizabeth. She's like this teeny tiny little girl, and when her and her mother are walking away, that's when Paul comes in, and he literally passes them as they're leaving, and he dumps his cap to them.
Right.
And now it's just creepy, because now it's just like he's looking at them and like, later on he's going to be really trying to like fuck that one, but
And he doesn't really age that much. They give him a beard.
They give him a beard. That standard Hollywood thing of like, how did he age? He grew a beard. It's either, if you want to show someone aging, you either give them a beard or you give them a pair of glasses to show that time has passed.
Right.
They either grow facial hair or their eyesight has gotten worse. And that is how you show time. I have to adjust my glasses now. Okay, there we go. I'm all set. Yeah, I mean, as far as... It's so weird, because as a movie, if we take it as a standalone, it's still solid.
Mm-hmm.
And it could have easily been a one-and-done movie, which, I mean, again, I believe that was the intention. There was nothing to indicate that this would have been anything supremely successful. I think they were even taking a big chance shooting it in color and spending all the extra money on it. But there was nothing to say, hey, this is going to be like a massive hit. We need to like plan for the future. So I think like as a self-contained Frankenstein film, it works. It's not particularly close to the book, especially in terms of the characterization of Victor Frankenstein himself, which is probably, that's the biggest thing throughout this whole series, is the decisions they made with that character. Because Victor Frankenstein in the book, well, first of all, he's not a baron at all. And he's, a college student.
Yeah.
He's young. And the big thing about the book is that it's supposed to be like a moral lesson of, science gone wrong and someone not taking responsibility for his actions. And admittedly, in the book, it's strange and it's kind of hard to translate into a movie. Victor is desperate to create a being, and he makes the creature by stitching together the parts of the bodies and all this other stuff, and then he does what he needs to.
Yeah.
The creature comes to life, and as soon as he sees the creature, he's like, oh, it's hideous, and he runs away and leaves it to its own devices. So, which one that doesn't translate well into a movie of like, how did you not know that it was hideous until it like came to life? You've been staring at it all fucking day, every day for like weeks on end, whatever. But the big moral of the story is like, he doesn't take responsibility for what he's created. He doesn't become a parent to his child, essentially. He sees it, he's horrified, he runs away, and then the creature is left on its own, and eventually, like, of its own accord, it develops and learns how to talk, it learns how to do this, it learns how to do that, and then finds out who Victor is and comes back to get revenge on him. And it's...
seriously?
Yeah. Oh. It's our sins coming back to bite us in the ass later. Mel Brooks actually had one of the better takes on it. I heard him talk about in interviews is the concept of womb envy, which he dubbed as man's jealousy, whether conscious or not, of a woman's ability to create life. Because aside from the portion that we contribute, a male cannot, or at least a human male cannot create life. We can't grow a life inside of us. We can't give birth. We can't do anything like that. We just contribute the one factor, the easy factor, and then the woman does all the work, and then she gives birth. So he sees the story of Frankenstein as an allegory for man's jealousy of not being able to create life. So Frankenstein's like, fuck that, I'm going to create life. The other reasoning in the book is that his mother had died when he was younger, and he is traumatized by that and wants to prevent people from ever dying again. So it's all like good intentions, moral lessons. You don't get shit with that in this movie, because this version of Baron Victor Frankenstein is a fucking sociopath who, yes, he's very determined, but we're never really given any reasoning for why he wants to do this. To my recollection, there's no like impetus for like, I want to create life. Why, Victor? Why not?
Right.
That's not actual dialogue in the movie, but it might as well be, because there's no reasoning given aside from like almost like an ego trip of like, oh, we've discovered the ability to create life, to restore. Well, he even says, it's like, we have discovered the secret of life, and we used it to bring back a creature that was dead. Now we must do the next step. We must start. We must do the whole. We must start from scratch. We must make a life. So I think it's more just like an ego trip of like, we've discovered this secret, and now it's not just enough to have done this. I need to go that one step further. It's also very blatant in the movie that good old Victor Frankenstein is an atheist. He does not believe in God nor give a shit about God, and he's literally, everyone else is all concerned of like, it's heresy, Victor. No, it's an affront against God, and Victor's just like, God who? He doesn't care.
Yeah.
Which again, ironic that sequence that we talked about, where as a kid I thought it was always kind of cheesy that when Paul refuses to help him during the actual creation sequence, and then Victor realizes he can't operate the machine by himself. It was built, as he says to him, he's like, it was built for dual operation. You know that.
Right.
And then he goes and pleads with Paul to come help him, and then kind of threatens and is like, I'll show Elizabeth, I'll do this, I'll do that. And while he's gone, a convenient bolt of lightning strikes the machinery and starts it up and actually causes the creation of, or the giving life to the creature without his help. And as a kid, I'm like, well, that's kind of cheesy and convenient. Right. But then, things that were talked about in like commentary tracks and other stuff is that it's ironic that it for Victor Frankenstein, who is a very much an atheist, who is doing something that's an affront to the God that he doesn't believe in, that creature is then brought to life by an act of God.
Yeah.
Which is,
that's ironic.
I kind of like it.
Yeah, I like that.
What else? I mean, other little things, like things that didn't occur to me when I was a kid watching it. Like, I know compared to the Boris Karloff version of the monster, which is very, sympathetic and, you feel for him, and, you don't necessarily get that with Christopher Lee's creature, because you can kind of tell in this movie. It is Christopher Lee, who was cast because he was tall, essentially.
Brilliant.
Also, the first pairing of him and Peter Cushing together. I think they might have been in one other movie together, but probably didn't know each other at the time. But this is their first pairing in like a major film. I mean, he does what he can.
Awesome.
He does what he can with the part. There's a little bit of sympathy you get just from like the patheticness of it, but like not like you get with the Boris Karloff creature. So I do understand like the criticisms of that portrayal, but again, it's not what that movie's about. It's not. Like, whereas the James Whale Frankenstein is mostly about the Boris Karloff monster and what happens to him and everything else, this movie is still very much first and foremost about Peter Cushing as Victor Frankenstein. The monster's kind of like a separate thing.
Yeah, good.
But I like
that.
I like the other things in it, though, because the one part that kind of threw me off when I was a kid is when the creature is first alive. And it gets out of the tank and it's got the bandages across its face, which is a great little, I'm sure, shocked the shit out of people in 1957 when Victor walks into the room and it's just kind of standing there with the bandages on, and it's got bandages over its face, and it reaches up and it just rips the bandages off, and they do this like really fast track into its ugly fucking face, and it's like, ugh. Like, I think even as a kid I found that kind of shocking when it happened. And immediately when its eyes start to adjust and it looks at Victor, it suddenly like looks angry, and it reaches out and grabs him and starts choking him. And as a kid, I'm like, they're just making it like a vicious monster. The brain was damaged, all that other shit. But then I also realized, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Even if it's damaged, it's still the brain of Professor Bernstein, who, if he retains any memory now that he's been brought back to life, the last memory it would have is of Victor pushing him off the railing and like fucking killing him.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, oops. I'm gonna kill this son of a bitch. So I mean, there's that. So I like that little point of it. There's still like the weirdness. We talked about it before, but like the asexuality of Victor Frankenstein in this movie, where he has no interest in Elizabeth whatsoever.
Right.
Like as far as like a sexual interest in her. It was, something arranged between him and her mother, his aunt, that they would be married someday. She says as much in the movie. But like when she shows up, he has no physical interest in her at all. He pretty much ignores her through the whole movie.
Right.
But he doesn't have an aversion to getting married to her. He doesn't try and talk her out of it. He doesn't try and get her to leave. He seems fully committed to the idea of like, oh yes, we're going to be husband and wife. But like every time she tries to be affectionate with me, he's just like, nah. Like that one point that we saw where she tries to go in and kiss him on like the eve of their wedding, and he totally like friend zones her and just like leans forward and kisses her forehead and then walks away, and you're like, damn, dude, that's cold.
Well, he has no need for Elizabeth. He's a guy who just,
he fucks the maid.
Well, yeah, I don't think he's asexual, but he's keeping up looks.
Yeah. Yeah, it just
that's
seems...
all he does. He's a brilliant scientist. He just wants to.
But then why is he fucking the maid?
Because he's not asexual. He just wants to bang the maid.
That's a good point. There you go. Because he has physical needs that need to be addressed.
Yeah, but
and he doesn't have time for the rest of that shit. So he might as well fuck a person that he can basically then order to be like, now go take care of the laundry, will you? That's a good go.
The line that he says to her. That's so.
Oh, that's so hard. Yeah, you want to talk about like a fucking sociopath. Yeah, we're diving into it now, but there's so he's having an affair with the maid Justine, who is not the greatest actress in the world, or at least isn't doing the best accent in the world. And at one point, she starts giving him shit about the fact that Elizabeth is going to be his wife, and but you love me, and he basically like spurns her, and and then she's like, no, you have to marry me, you have to. I'm going to have a child, and all of a sudden he's just like, since when is this? It doesn't matter. It's true, that's all. And then he says, if I'm remembering correctly, why choose me to be the father? Pick any man in the village. Chances are it'll be right. Oh, sick burn.
That's fucked. That's fucked.
And then
Well, that's the thing. I don't think he's asexual. I think there's literally Elizabeth is there because she needs to be married off.
Yeah.
Which sounds terrible. That's how it was back then. She's looking for a husband.
Yeah.
And he's
and she's looking for a husband, and she's looking for a husband of means and wealth.
Yes, which is
because she and her mother were dependent upon him. She says so to Paul.
Well, even her mother tries to, hey, this is Elizabeth.
Yeah,
and the
she'll make someone
scene.
A fine wife one day. Yes, I'm sure she will.
Like he has no need for Elizabeth, but he needs to keep up his looks. She's a front. He has no use for her, but he's got to keep up the looks.
Yep.
He's like, okay, it's something I got to do. I got to get married. Okay, I'll do it. It's expected
of him.
And he's
so egotistical that he just doesn't give a shit. Like, even the idea of like, oh, maybe she'll find out. Well, what if she does? Yeah. Like, he literally does not care. Because he doesn't realize he's doing anything wrong.
No.
As far as he knows, everything he's doing is for the good of science, for the good of mankind. He does not give a shit.
Exactly.
He committed murder to get a brain. Outright murder.
Oh, look out!
Yeah,
which push you off the stairs.
That was one of the things that people were saying is like a plot hole. Is that he's
how's that a plot hole?
Because he's confessing to the priest.
Oh,
and he literally has confessed to a murder.
Right.
He's trying to get them to believe
this
the story.
Out after the movie. I was like, wait a minute, he's confessing this to
Yeah. It's like, not only did yes, I had a creature, but like the creature wasn't born when Professor Bernstein was killed. I did that, and the creature only killed Justine because I locked her in the room. Which, again, a very bizarre... What a fucked up sequence, because, now, you could argue that there's no proof that Justine is actually pregnant.
Right.
She's not showing at that point. She just tells him that she is, and again, he says, since when is this? And she's like, it doesn't matter, it's true. So it's like, she doesn't even say how long.
Right.
So one could argue
that
she was just saying that as like a form of entrapment to try and trick him into marrying her. Mm-hmm. Saying, you've got to... Well, she says it. She's like, you've got to. I'm with child. So in theory, maybe she wasn't. But on the assumption that she is,
that is like a fucked up form of abortion.
Oh,
because he
God.
literally, like, when you realize, like, it's not only is it just the fact that he locks her in the room with the creature that kills her, and then there's that look of, like, relief on his face when he hears the screams, and he's just like, that's taken care of.
That's not good.
But then you realize that, like, it goes back in your head, like, oh, she was pregnant.
She was pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And again, because I have, the twisted mind, I have to bring up the idea of, like, what did he do to her? This male creature that is literally like a grown male, but has, like, the mentality of, like, a child that has just been born, but has probably, like, a grown man's libido, who's now seen its first woman since being born.
I think he just killed her. Do you think?
I certainly hope so.
Jesus.
I hope he didn't do anything else. Only reason I even bring that up is because they actually used that in, I think I talked to you about it, that stage version of Frankenstein that had Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller, where they were, like, altering the parts.
Wait, what happens?
There's a part in that where the creature actually shows up on Frankenstein's wedding night and talks to Elizabeth, the bride, and then, like, as, like, a revenge against Victor. It's weird because when I watched it on YouTube, they cut it out.
Yeah.
Because it was supposed to be, like, for public, during the pandemic thing. Hey, we're going to offer this for free for, like, a week. But I think they cut out anything that was, like, too much for, like, without it being an age-restricted video.
Right.
And I had to look it up. I think it was, like, the actual scene. It's like him throwing Elizabeth onto the bed, and then it kind of cuts away, and then you see the aftermath. But it's like, I think the creature raped her, but, like, so forcefully that it killed her.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, so...
I see. Okay. Yeah, but
you ain't gonna do that in 1957.
No, they waited a couple more years till Revenge.
Yes. No. Must be destroyed.
Must be destroyed. My bad.
Yeah,
my bad.
Not Revenge.
Yes,
Revenge.
my bad. I meant Must Be Destroyed. Why do I keep mixing up the names?
No. I mean, they're all very common names. Very few of them have anything to do with the actual movie you're watching, except for Created Woman.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So I mean, what else is there? I mean, it's the thing. Like, as a standalone Frankenstein movie, it's very unique. It's very different from anything that they had ever done in film before for Frankenstein. The main thing being that they're focusing more on Victor as technically the monster of the movie, and not as much on the creature. Now, I think that's twofold. One is because you have Peter Cushing, who's a major TV star at the time. You want to utilize him as much as you can. The other reasoning is that Universal Studios, that had produced all the ones in the 30s and 40s, they got wind of Hammer wanting to make a Frankenstein movie. Universal cannot stop them from doing this because the novel's in public domain. Anybody can make a Frankenstein movie. It didn't matter. The concern that Universal had was like, fine, you make your little Frankenstein movie, but we damn well better not catch you copying anything from our movies or we're going to sue your ass. And that made Hammer extremely paranoid. They would have sued them even if they used any, like, if the makeup looked anything like the Boris Karloff makeup, they were going to sue them for it. So it was like, I think they even, like, in the movie, Christopher Lee is credited as the creature, not the monster. Because I think they were even paranoid that if they called it the monster, Universal would sue them for using that phrase, Jesus. Which is insane. But I think it benefits because even... I don't know if it's true, but Terence Fisher, the director, has even claimed that he never watched the original Universal movies at the time, so he wasn't, and he made a point of not watching them when preparing for that movie, so he wasn't influenced. So I think it benefits because it makes it different enough that it puts its own stamp on it.
Yeah.
And, I mean, again, it was not meant to be a franchise. I'm thoroughly convinced of this. I don't know the details, but we talked about it before. It's the only movie in those 6 films that has any kind of bookend, like a wraparound story. The actual telling of this story is all in flashback, because you begin with a priest showing up to the prison because Frankenstein has requested him. And he says, he's like, I called for you because I could think of no one else. I want to tell my story, then maybe you can tell them, maybe they'll believe me, and all that other shit. And everything in the movie, until the end, is a flashback being told by Victor to the priest. And then the flashback ends, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, Paul's come to me. Oh, Paul's here. He'll tell you it's true. And then Paul shows up and he's like, go on, Paul, tell them about it. And then Paul's like very aloof and just like, tell them what, Victor? He's like, about the creature I made. Tell them, who did it, Victor? He did it, the creature I made, the man. And then he's like, you were the only one ever to see him aside from myself and Justine, the girl you murdered. Ooh. But it wasn't me, it was him. And he pretty much just leaves him out to dry.
Yeah.
And then Victor gets pissed off and tries to strangle Paul. And then
he forgets himself again
because he tried to strangle the priest at the beginning. I apologize, I'll not forget myself again. But when Paul gets here, the shit's going to hit the fan. And I mean, you could definitely see that as like Paul purposely dicking him over to make sure that he goes to the guillotine and gets killed. But you could have easily then, because then it follows Paul. It's like the only time we actually are not the only time, but one of the only times we're not with Frankenstein at all. Yeah. Paul leaves and goes into the waiting area, and there's Elizabeth, and she's still, she definitely got shot in the arm by Victor because her arm is in a sling. And all he does is go over to her and he's like, there's nothing more we can do for him now. Come, I'll take you home. And I'm thinking like, oh, you mean his home? You sneaky son of a bitch. You stole his wife. You stole his home. You stole his clothes. You son of a bitch. But he doesn't say anything about the creature or anything else to her. So I think the implication in the way they wanted the movie to be, which again, I mean, and I'll talk about when we talk about the sequel, is it's very convenient that they established this big vat of acid that Victor has to destroy excess body parts that he doesn't need. So like when they originally get the framework for the creature, the body, Paul's like, oh, the birds didn't waste any time, the eyes and half the head's eaten away. And then Victor takes the big scalpel and he's like, what are you going to do? He's like, take the head off. It's no use to me anyway. And he literally cuts the head off and then puts it in the acid bath and dissolves it. So then conveniently, when the monster, when Victor throws the lantern at the monster and lights him on fire, it falls through the skylight and lands right into the acid bath. And he says, within half an hour, there was no trace of him left. Oh, convenient. So like any evidence that this thing actually existed is gone.
Right.
And I think that was their way of keeping it ambiguous. So like you could interpret it that, yes, this all really happened and Paul is purposely like not, what do you call it? I can't think of the word. He's not confirming any of this, so that Victor will go to the guillotine and they can be done with it. Or was it all Victor really doing all this, like the murders and everything, and nothing was ever real as far as the creature? Is he really just insane?
It's ambiguous.
Yeah, it's an ambiguous ending.
So, but does Elizabeth? I can't remember. Does she see the monster?
She doesn't. She doesn't. The closest she gets is when she's walking along the rooftop, and then she doesn't see the creature, and then Victor sees the creature coming up near her, and he's like, Elizabeth! And then she turns and looks at him. The creature comes up behind her, and Victor tries to shoot the creature and ends up shooting her in the shoulder, and then
the only
she
thing
faints.
She sees is
Victor trying to shoot her.
Yeah, my future husband's about to murder me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I think that was the intention, is that it's a very ambiguous kind of thing.
Right.
But would you say that's enough about that? Can we dive into revenge?
Hell yeah.
Okay.
Keep it going.
Here's my thinking. It's a strong film.
Yeah.
Hey, loyal listeners. Remember not too long ago, or actually quite a while ago, when we were talking about how quantity didn't necessarily mean quality? And we were talking about how movies are nice when they're brief and not overly long. Well, we don't take our own advice. So our conversation on both The Curse and The Revenge of Frankenstein went on a bit too long. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to end our conversation this week with The Curse of Frankenstein, and we're going to pick it up again next week when we discuss the follow-up from 1958, The Revenge of Frankenstein. So thanks for listening, and hopefully you'll be back with us next week for the remainder of the discussion.